This week on Jerusalem Dateline, Israel celebrates its 68th birthday. Nearly 70 years after its birth, a new generation takes to the streets of Jerusalem. They remember the Holocaust, but look forward to the future.
I feel so proud to be a Jew and so happy I'm here and we have this country.
Plus, the history of the State of Israel through the eyes of one of its most famous photojournalists. And a look at how two Jews believe God brought about the miracle of Israel. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline, coming to you this week from a very crowded and loud Safra Square. Behind me, thousands of young people have gathered as part of the March of the Living. They'll be going from here in Safra Square down to the Western Wall near the Temple Mount. We'll be joining them throughout the program. They've come from all over the world, from Panama, Argentina, and the United States. Just a few days ago, they were in Poland, where they visited the Auschwitz-Birkenau Nazi death camp. From that solemn experience, they've come here to the liberated city of Jerusalem. More than 10,000 marchers, young and old, from around the world, walked nearly 2 miles from Auschwitz to Birkenau, Nazi death camps, on Yom HaShoah, Israel's Holocaust Remembrance Day. A week later, they fly here to Jerusalem for the end of the lesson. Thousands march on the streets of Jerusalem to the Western Wall. From the Holocaust to Israel's rebirth, this final march is the Resurrection or Redemption Walk.
So we're trying to teach no revenge, but love, tolerance, understand your fellow men.
In 28 years, more than 250,000 people from 52 nations participated in the march. Dr. Shmuel Rosenman, chairman of the March of the Living International, told CBN News tolerance could help avoid another Holocaust.
But unfortunately, you see what happened in the last 70 years, all over the world. So the world did not learn much. So we believe that each one of the participants can go to his own community, to his own family, Jew or not Jews, okay? And to be a change agent for the love of the fellow man.
Nazis murdered 6 million Jews from 1933 to 1945, half of them in Poland, and 1 million in Auschwitz-Birkenau. Marching that same ground made a huge impact.
Just seeing what our people had to go through so many years ago and the amount of people that had to go through it really got to me.
And I can't put myself in their shoes, even though I've tried to put myself in their scenarios so many times. And walking through the grounds, someone could have been shot there.
As time passes, fewer survivors remain to tell their stories. Adele Besserman is one who still works to spread the word to a younger generation.
I was 9 years old, and here I am on my 5th trip to be with the children. And you know what? That monster didn't win completely. I have now 3 children, 3 daughter-in-laws, 6 grandkids, and 1 grandson. And I love every moment of it.
Organizers want to make sure this is never forgotten.
We're kind of the generation that has to tell their stories. So it's just like a roller coaster of emotions, but it's something that I think everyone needs to experience.
Some already tell of personal connections.
My grandma's a survivor, and she was from Lithuania, and her family owns a windmill, and one of the Christian workers kept her there in their house, and a little girl was scrutinized by a Nazi, the Christian little girl, and asked, "Are there any Jews here?" And she said no, and she saved my grandmother's life.
My entire family is from Poland. Half of them died here. The other half made it to America right before the war started. This is my 3 brothers and me with my great-grandma on one of her birthdays. My mom packed me this. She wanted me to see this as I was walking through the camp.
Many young people wrap themselves with Israeli flags, a sign of victory.
My 2 great-grandparents were on a train going to a concentration camp. Around 7 people jumped off and they hid in the woods. But some of my family members actually didn't jump off and they actually perished.
At Birkenau, many placed small handmade signs along the railroad tracks that carried the Jews to their death.
It says never forget, and I have in memory of my great-grandparents, Simon and Shura Pupko, and in honor of my grandmother, Masha Pupko.
If seeing is believing, then the march spurs them to action.
It could happen again, and we're trying to prevent that, and we have to speak up.
To go with survivors is such a privilege, to be the witness to the witness, and the fact that we're here to carry on that story and their difficulty and what they did to get through it.
I think there really is a message. If you come back and you see this place, you learn about the horrors that happened in the Holocaust. It'd never happen again, it's happening all over the world, in Africa especially, where we really need to step up and make a difference.
Christians participate too, to show their love for Israel and the Jewish people.
A lot of innocent blood was shed in the land of Poland. So we prayed to God for forgiveness for what has happened to the people of Israel.
People said that where was the world when it was happening, and I really need to tell the world what happened here.
In Israel, the mood was completely different as 3,500 youth walked along Jerusalem's old city walls.
After seeing all the pain and the sorrow in Poland, coming here, landing here in Israel, it just brought spirits and good energy to everyone.
The energy here is great, lots of people, lots of happiness, and we hope that never again.
At the Western Wall, they gathered to sing and pray for Israel, a sign of triumph of the March of the Living.
It felt right, seeing how the Jewish community survived that extermination, and we're able to build a community here that's prosperous.
I feel so proud to be a Jew and so happy I'm here and we have this country.
As you can see, these young people have started their march down to the Western Wall, and they're celebrating Israel's 68th Independence Day. Israelis around the country are celebrating with parties and picnics. It's sort of like July 4th in the United States. But the celebrations pale in comparison to the miracle that led to their independence. Here in Independence Hall on May 14, 1948, David Ben-Gurion declared the formation of the State of Israel. For the first time in nearly 2,000 years, the Jewish people were a nation once again.
This is where Israel was born. When people come here, they are astonished to see this place. Most of the people that visit here, their first reaction is, this is it? That's all you have here?
Ben-Gurion and his team looked for an inconspicuous place to declare statehood. At the time, Independence Hall, one of the first buildings in Tel Aviv, was an art gallery. During a 1978 renovation, the decision was made to take the building back to its original look at the time of the declaration.
Traveling in Israel will teach you that God has a tendency to perform His best miracles in the most humble places. This place is one of those places.
According to Isaac Dror, who heads education at the Hall, the establishment of Israel shook the world and became a haven for the Jewish people.
How many people prayed for it every day when the Jews said next year in Jerusalem and next year in Jerusalem? That's what they meant.
When Israel declared its independence, dancing filled the streets. But the celebration was short-lived. The very next day, armies of 5 Arab nations invaded the newborn state.
When it comes to the story of the War of Independence, we don't have many answers there. Very hard for us to explain. Call it a miracle, call it whatever you want, but we are here.
130,000 people visit this tiny hall each year to hear about the miracle of Israel, including tourists like this group from Massachusetts.
I didn't expect it to be so moving. My whole life, Israel has always been here. So I think in some ways took it for granted. And now I, felt like I was here that day.
After 2,000 years of wandering and persecution, for Jews to have their own state really has to be a miracle.
Across the street is this monument with a scripture from Jeremiah. Again I will build you, and you shall be rebuilt, O Virgin of Israel. Surrounded by skyscrapers and a new generation visiting the hall, it's testament to God's faithfulness to His promise to build and rebuild the Jewish state and its people. As you can see, the marchers have made it past the Jaffa Gate here in Jerusalem. And even though Israel has grown dramatically in the past 68 years, it still faces a great deal of opposition in the international arena. For example, the UN agency UNESCO failed to recognize any biblical connection between the Jewish people and the Temple Mount or the Western Wall. Because of that, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu invited all UN personnel in Israel to a seminar on Jewish history. The UN Special Envoy to the Middle East declined Netanyahu's invitation, but the Prime Minister's spokesman said the seminar would go on.
Absolutely. We're going to hold it, and we hope that a lot of diplomats come. We may even live stream it, perhaps to show folks at home.
I'm holding the UNESCO resolution on Jerusalem. It calls Israel the occupying power and also condemns Israel for its alleged aggression against Muslim worshippers. It cites the Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Harim al-Sharif, but makes no mention of the Temple Mount or the 4,000-year-old history of the Jewish people in Jerusalem.
The Temple Mount isn't just any site. It's the single holiest site to the Jewish people and has been so for thousands of years. So denying the link between the Jewish people and the Temple Mount is tantamount to saying you don't belong here.
The UNESCO resolution referred to the Western Wall as the Al-Barak Plaza. The Western Wall was the outer retaining wall of the Temple Mount in the time of Jesus. It criticized Israeli archaeological digs in the area and also blamed Israel for violence on the Temple Mount last fall, but didn't mention the actions of Muslim rioters. He said the seminar is meant to correct the record.
Well, the Prime Minister wanted to expose the truth about the Temple Mount, perhaps give a refresher history course about the Jewish people and their connection to this land and the Temple Mount, because it spans back thousands of years.
He said the resolution makes peace more difficult.
The fact that a UN body is denying that link between the Jewish people and the Temple Mount actually makes peace harder, because peace is based off respect and understanding. And this shows neither respect for history nor an understanding of the Jewish people.
More than 40 nations voted for the resolution on Jerusalem. The U.S. voted against it. Up next, see how one Israeli photojournalist not only experienced, but documented the birth of the State of Israel. When we come back. As you can see, the marchers are on their way to the Western Wall. They're celebrating the 68th anniversary of Israel's independence. Several years ago, when they celebrated the 62nd anniversary, we talked to a man who lived through that history. He not only lived that history, but he chronicled it with his camera. More than 60 years ago, Israeli photojournalist David Rubinger began his career, just before the birth of the State of Israel.
That gave me a chance that very few photographers have to really cover a story, an entire story from A to Z.
Rubinger tells his story and Israel's in a book called Israel Through My Lens. Documented those early historic days, like the day in 1947 when the UN voted for the establishment of a Jewish state.
People were dancing in the street. The young kids, on the morrow of the UN decision to establish the State of Israel, climbed aboard a British armored car with the British police numbers on it and the British driver, and with a hand-painted flag.
He began as a freelance cameraman and later worked for years as Time Life's photographer. He showed Israel's first years, its fight for independence, and the joy of Jews returning to the Promised Land from all over the world.
The idealism, the feeling, the striving for equality, social justice, ashamed not to work.
During his career, he's photographed nearly all of Israel's leaders, from Jerusalem's legendary mayor Teddy Kollek to its future Prime Minister Shimon Peres, Prime Minister Golda Meir at the Knesset and in her kitchen, Yitzhak Rabin and his wife Leah having breakfast, then Israeli Generals Rabin and Moshe Dayan during wartime. And of course, Israel's first Prime Minister, David Ben-Gurion.
His face was something. I have it on the cover of one of my books. It's like granite, strong like a rock.
He's covered Israel's triumphs, capturing the jubilation after the successful raid on Entebbe. He showed Israel's suffering through its many wars.
One of my dearest pictures is one taken in Aswan in 1980. Very, very intimate pose between two leaders after 4 wars. And such intimacy.
But Rubinger's most famous photograph came during the 1967 Six-Day War. For the first time in nearly 2,500 years, Israeli paratroopers captured Jerusalem's Old City and the famous Western Wall. The paratroopers came to the wall, and Rubinger was there.
In order to get any little bit of perspective. I wanted to shoot from below, and I was lying on the ground and shooting, and these three soldiers just walked by. I got 3 frames, nearly identical.
Years later, Rubinger photographed those same 3 paratroopers back at the Western Wall. The men and their country have grown up.
Grown up is the word. Gone is the beauty of childhood, the idealism of youth.
Since 1967, Rubinger feels Israel has made unwise decisions. He's very critical of many of its policies. But as the nation celebrates one more anniversary, he says it's been a remarkable history.
Summing up 62 years, you still cannot avoid realizing one thing. I think it's unprecedented in history that people did in 60 years what this country did in 60 years.
Coming up, hear from 2 Jewish men who believe the birth of Israel wasn't just an accident of history, but a work of divine providence. As you can see, the marchers have made their way around the walls of the old city and behind me, just through the Zion Gate, on their way to the Western Wall. They're all celebrating the independence of Israel. And we talked to David Nekrutman. He's the executive director of the Jewish Christian Center for Understanding and Cooperation. And he told us what he believes is the hand of God on the birth of Israel.
So a year after the establishment of the State of Israel, the chief rabbinate said, this is such a miraculous event. Remember, 2,000 years being divorced from your land, and like it says in Isaiah 66:8, a nation will be born in a day. Well, that's exactly what happened. We prayed and hoped for this. Now it's actually here. This is an extraordinary event that deserves praise, to the extent that we'll invoke Psalms 113 to 118. So 22 centuries later, from Hanukkah until now, we actually have a sacred holiday on the Jewish calendar. To me, the best answer to any atheist is explain the existence of the Jewish people. There's no logical reason in the world that we should be here today. It's only by God's unfailing love for his people, for his covenantal word. And this is my biggest proof, the State of Israel. If God is faithful to me, he's definitely faithful to you as a Christian.
Would you say many of the conditions that existed in 1948 still exist today when Israel is surrounded by enemies that want to destroy it?
Well, that's Psalm 118. For me, that's sort of like the basis, even though we're surrounded by all this. Death is always lurking over Israel. This is Psalm 91. Like, I can tell you this, when the rockets were going over Netanya, Psalm 91 came to mind. It's not the Iron Dome that protects us, it's the God Dome. It's his hand. There could be 10,000 arrows, 10,000 rockets. At the end of the day, there's this miracle that happens that God's protection is over this land. We wake up in miracles every single day in this land. And just walking the land, you feel God's presence more than any other place in the world.
Well, the marchers are making their way around the Jewish quarter and just a few feet away from the Western Wall Plaza. We also talked to a man named Mr. Drybones. His real name is Yaakov Kirshen, and he's a world-famous cartoonist. In his studio, he explained to us why he calls his comic strip Drybones and what it has to do with the Bible.
When I came to Israel and decided I would start doing a cartoon, I thought, well, I needed a name, like Kirshen's Corner, with corner spelt with a K. And I kept thinking, what should it be? And then I realized that one of the things that had brought me to Israel was my reading of the book of Ezekiel. And in the book of Ezekiel, this guy Ezekiel, who lived 2,600 years ago, saw a vision of what for him was the far future. And that was of a time when it looked like the world had destroyed the Jewish people. But at that point, we would come out of our graves, and the image he saw was of a valley filled with dry bones. And these bones came together, like the knee bone connected to the shin bone and all like that. And in that imagery, he saw the rebuilding of the Jewish state. He saw the coming together and the ingathering of the Jewish people. He saw the the rebuilding of the cities and the planting of the trees. And therefore, if I was going to do a cartoon about what was happening today, all I could do would be to add to what he had seen incredibly 2,600 years ago. And so I decided to call it Dry Bones, thinking that everyone would understand.
Coming up, a reflection about Israel on its 68th birthday when we come back. Well, as you can see behind me, the marchers have made it here to the Western Wall. In just a few minutes, they're going to have a huge prayer meeting. Well, as you look around, you can see signs of life that came out of the ashes of the Holocaust. You look at the survival of the Jewish people and the resurrection of the nation of Israel. Even when Israel continues to be surrounded by enemies committed to its destruction, you see a young nation not only survive but thrive. You see the desert bloom. You see technological breakthroughs that bless the world. You see the continued prophetic ingathering of the Jews from all over the world, coming back to their biblical homeland and to the promised land. It's a sign to the world that the God of Israel, as King David wrote in the Psalms, that he that watches over Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps. He will watch over Israel. Today, census figures reveal that half of the world Jewry now lives in Israel, and more Jews continue to be drawn here from all over the earth. And even though Israel is threatened by Hamas terror tunnels on its southern border, or more than 100,000 rockets by Hezbollah on its northern border, and the specter of Iran's nuclear program, Israel ranks number 11 out of all the nations in happiness. And more than 80% of Israelis are proud to be Israeli. So nearly 70 years after its rebirth, Israel continues to survive and thrive as a miracle to the nations and a testimony to the God of Israel. Well, that's it for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.